They said no life could survive here. That the war had poisoned every inch of this world. But I saw her standing in the ruins, barefoot in the dust, watching me. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She wasn't human. But somehow, she heard everything I had tried so hard to forget. This is the story of how I met her. Not in a city. Not on Earth. But on a dead planet, where nothing was supposed to live. The year is 2391. Nox Delta, once a human outpost, destroyed by biowarfare, is now a forbidden zone. No survivors. No signal. Not a single blade of grass grows on its fractured, frozen surface. Just toxic winds, ash storms, and electromagnetic tempests howling like echoes from a civilization that ended itself. Among the ruins, someone still lives, or at least, endures. Silas Rahan, former Earth logistics officer, once served in the Western Bio-Rings, where kill orders came via satellite like morning briefings. He lost his wife in a friendly fire strike. Lost faith in his commanders. And then, lost his reason to live. Instead of going home, he filed for exile on a forgotten research station once used for low-grade bioreplication. A place beyond saving, except, maybe, for his conscience. Day by day, Silas dug with bare hands. He planted band regrowth seeds. He healed half-mechanical creatures, broken animals left behind during the evacuation. He didn't speak. Didn't open any channels. Some days, he couldn't even remember the sound of his own voice. To the universe, he was dead. But to this toxic land, he was a faint, stubborn light. Until one day, after a violent magnetic storm, he walked through the scrap fields, where discarded medical tech, corrupt chips, and undocumented modules lay buried in dust. There, he found a sealed bio-container, its locks eroded by time. He meant to salvage the energy core. But when he opened it, he froze. Not a battery. Not equipment. Inside was a life form. Humanoid. Wrapped in a soft, turquoise cocoon. Still pulsing with a faint electromagnetic rhythm. She didn't move. But her eyes were open. Unblinking. Expressionless. But not empty. He scanned her. No data. No DNA. No system code. No planetary ID. She didn't exist. And then, just as he leaned in to check her neural response, a word surfaced inside his mind. Not spoken, not heard, but felt, like a ripple of warmth through the cold. Emmy. Silas brought Emmy back to the outpost, placing her inside a quarantine pod once used for bioviral analysis. None of the equipment could read her vital signs. Every scan gave contradictory results. She was alive but not biological. No enzymes. No chemical reactions. Just a rhythmic electromagnetic pulse, steady like a heartbeat. She lay still, wrapped in the remnants of her broken cocoon. But when Silas got close, her hand, long, faintly glowing, gently touched his shoulder. No words. No mechanical movement. Yet instantly, visions surged through his mind. A burning rice field, a ship exploding in orbit. His wife's eyes staring at him for the last time. From that night on, whenever old nightmares returned, Emmy was there. She didn't speak, but her hand would rest lightly on his forehead, and the dreams would quiet, as if the memory itself had been cradled back to sleep. Silas watched her. She didn't eat like a human, didn't drink, didn't sleep. She stood for hours beneath the humming lab lights, as if absorbing something invisible. At times, her skin would shift in color, faint pulses of light like mood echoes. No language, no expressions. But whenever Emmy walked into a room, the air changed. The vents stopped whistling. The metallic hums faded. And the heart of a man long rusted by loss began, quietly, to listen again. Emmy didn't just feel emotions. She responded to them through the world itself. When Silas grew angry at himself, the walls of the station trembled faintly electric. When he calmed down, glowing moss would bloom on nearby pipes. She was like a mirror, one that didn't reflect your face, but mirrored your emotions into physical reality. The wounded animals in the station, genetic hybrids with mechanical implants, used to be wild and volatile. Now, they rested quietly near Emmy. A malfunctioning bird drone, once prone to attack, curled up on her shoulder, seeking warmth it shouldn't have known how to crave. Silas started asking questions. Not about Emmy's origin, but about everything he thought he understood. She never spoke. Yet in the silences between them, something began to grow. Not curiosity. Something closer to trust. The automated plant systems, long dead, started sprouting again. Not from repair, but simply because she was there. The first time Silas touched her hand, he didn't feel skin. He felt as if he were touching the shape of something that couldn't be defined. She didn't belong to this world, and that was why she understood human loneliness better than humans ever could. Even though Silas tried to keep Emmy hidden, the electromagnetic field radiating from her left traces subtle but detectable in the space around Nox Delta. It started with whispers. Scavengers, illegal settlers, wandering mystics. They all spoke of the healing girl. They described a being who could ease pain, make trees grow from dead soil, and look at you in a way that made it impossible to lie to yourself. Like all rumors, it eventually reached the wrong ears. A team of mercenaries landed, hired by an unnamed syndicate that hunted unknown life forms. They carried emotion-jamming weapons and wore thought-shielding masks. No chatter, no warnings. They moved toward the station in silence. Silas stood in their way, his old rifle trembling in his hands. He had no plan. Only one certainty: they couldn't touch her. Then the commander stepped forward, leveled his weapon at Emmy, and froze. His body trembled. The gun slipped from his fingers. Behind his mask, tears streamed down. I see, my sister, he choked. Not Emmy, his own sister. A girl who had starved to death on a garbage rig. Her pleading eyes. Her final breath. Memories he had buried under years of violence now flooded back too fast, too raw. The rest of the squad faltered. One vomited. Another fell to his knees. None of them understood what was happening. Only that they couldn't look at her. Not without collapsing under the weight of their own truths. They retreated. No shots fired. No words spoken. Silas didn't understand the mechanism behind it. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Emmy wasn't a weapon. She was a mirror. And no one wants to see themselves that clearly. After that night, Silas's station stopped being a hideout. It became something else. Not a stronghold. Not a base. But a refuge for the forgotten. A storm dropped off a child half human, half clone, barely alive. Emmy held the child, not with her arms, but with her gaze. The trembling stopped. A derelict robot, missing its control core, wandered and speaking garbled code. Emmy laid a hand on its chest. Not to fix it, but to remind it of its first purpose. To protect the garden. More came. Twin siblings discarded by a medical facility. A yellow-blooded being with no origin file. None of them asked what Emmy was. Because near her, you didn't need to ask. She didn't preach. Didn't teach. But somehow, every being at the station began to learn how to look at one another without fear. She taught through presence, through silence, through listening not with ears, but by simply being there. Silas was no longer the only one who believed. The children began whispering a name through the halls. A name no one taught them. The listening station. No one gave them that name. But maybe Emmy had spoken it. Not with sound, but with her heart. That night, the station was silent like a tomb. The children were asleep. Silas was checking a cracked recycling duct when he saw Emmy standing still in front of the old radio transmitter. A device so ancient even the dust had grown tired of clinging to it. She didn't move. Not for 3 hours. Eyes wide open, staring into some invisible point in the stars. Silas opened his mouth to speak. But then the signal light blinked. A faint, flickering wave of data came through encoded in a language structure that matched known galactic protocol. After filtering, only a single message appeared on the cracked screen. Unregistered entity detected. Emergency retrieval activated. Preparing data sync. Begin origin code restructuring. The signal came from the Galactic Data Core, the central archive of all known biological records, identity licenses, and genetic copyrights. Emmy had no profile, no DNA, no morphology code, no origin, no rights. Which meant she wasn't just unauthorized. She was a threat to the system. Silas stared at the message. Cold sweat ran down his back. He had once worked in data compliance units. He knew what followed a retrieval code. They would come. No warning. No court. No mercy. He looked at Emmy. She didn't move. Didn't flinch. As if she had always known. This day would come. Silas packed through the night. He activated emergency protocols, gathered the children, and prepared to move the station into the lower atmospheric belt. A zone where galactic signals couldn't penetrate. He had routes. He had escape maps. He had everything. Except Emmy's will. She stood in the middle of the garden. The one she had revived from ashes. where trees grew out of what had once been poisoned stone, where every leaf felt like a miracle of defiance. Silas grabbed her arm. "We have to go," he pleaded. "They are coming." But Emmy only shook her head. Gently. And then, for the first time, she sent him a wave of emotion so precise it might as well have been spoken words. "No one gets to choose where I belong. Not even you." She walked alone toward the signal tower. The rusted antenna still held power. And as she moved, the ground trembled. Not from her weight, but as if something deep within the planet was waking up to greet her. Emmy placed her hand on the terminal. She sent a signal. Not a distress call. Not a plea for surrender. A visual broadcast. Just an image of her planting a seed. No violence. No resistance. Just a being, sowing life on a world humans had called dead. That image reached every outpost. It was copied into millions of memory banks. And in that instant, across the stars, the universe had to ask itself, do we even understand what life really means? The signal Emmy sent, the image of a being planting life on a dead planet, did more than reach satellites. It slipped into the hearts of people who had long forgotten how to believe in anything. There was no official broadcast. No explanation. Just a 12-second clip showing Emmy placing a seed into the red soil of Nox Delta, under toxic skies, and smiling. Not with lips, but with the soft, glowing light behind her eyes. That recording spread faster than quantum networks could trace. Across planetary forums, hidden message boards, classrooms, even hospitals, one question echoed. If life can grow where death reigned, maybe hope can too. The Galactic Union, the very force that issued the retrieval order, was suddenly paralyzed. Any move against Emmy now would be seen as an act against the one thing people crave most: hope. There were no decrees, no press conferences. But in reality, Emmy had become a living symbol. A concept no system could replicate. Empathy. Healing without medicine. And a simple, radical choice. The right to simply exist, without belonging to anyone. Silas watched from a distance. Not proud. Not self-congratulatory. Just quietly grateful. Emmy didn't need to be decoded. She only needed to be free. And now, the entire universe was watching as that freedom became a collective decision. A week later, another signal came. But this time, not from any human source. It was a slip wave. An emotion-based frequency that only sentient empaths could perceive. Emmy stood still for hours beside the old receiver, her skin gradually shifting to silver, the light in her eyes turning from green to a deep, endless blue. Silas knew something was calling her. "Is it your home?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Emmy didn't respond. But she didn't have to. Silas understood. The universe was beginning to accept. She wasn't an anomaly. She was a fragment of a civilization that had never revealed itself. A species that communicated through intuition, fed on memory, and left the smallest possible footprint on the world around them. News of the signal leaked. Scientists labeled the origin zone a nameless space, a non-coordinate, unmarked void in galactic maps. No light, no structure, no fixed point, but always present. Whenever the universe needed healing, Emmy could leave. She could return to her kind, to a realm where she'd be understood, where every part of her made sense. But one night, she sat under a tree, growing in the crater of an old bioweapon strike. Silas sat beside her, silent. And then, Emmy placed her hand on his chest. Not to read, not to calm, but to speak. Not with images, but with a crystal clear choice. I don't belong anywhere, but I choose to stay here. The seasonal shift came early. Nox Delta was changing, not through life itself, but through how the planet began to respond to Emmy's presence. Plants grew without water. Roots extended not just through soil but into the magnetic veins deep beneath the planet's crust. Each leaf pulsed with a faint shimmer of light, like whispers carried on the wind. Silas realized the truth. The garden had become a living memory. Each seed held a story. Each sprout, a wound rewritten as life. The station was no longer a shelter. It had turned into a biological brain, holding what humanity had long forgotten: the power to heal from what was broken. One afternoon, Emmy brought out a final seed. Unlike any other, it shimmered silver green. The air around it pulsed, almost like a heartbeat. "I found it inside me," Emmy transmitted softly. "The first memory of all of us." She said nothing more. She simply knelt and placed the seed at the deepest scar in the garden, the exact spot where war had burned everything away. No rituals, no prayers, just quiet intention. When the seed touched earth, the sky above flashed softly. No thunder, no storm, just a single ripple of light. A lullaby whispered across the surface of a long-wounded world. That night, every living being in the station shared the same dream. An endless field, where everyone they had ever loved was already waiting, not speaking, just smiling. In the morning, they all wept, but not from pain, from peace. Silas never questioned Emmy after that. He understood now. Sometimes, the bravest act is not to fight for life, but to plant it, knowing you may never live to see it bloom. That was the strength of a grower. And Emmy was the last sower, in a world that had forgotten its roots. A year after the last seed, Nox Delta was no longer dead. There were no updated maps, no official declarations, but spacefarers whispered, "If you're lost, tune your receiver to biofrequency 0.0001A. It will lead you to the listening station." Silas grew older. His hair silvered, but his eyes burned brighter than they ever had in youth. He taught the children how to listen without ears, how to see without eyes, how to forgive without words. And Emmy? She remained unchanged. barefoot, silent, still touching people's pain, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But something was different. She looked at the sky more often. One night, in the stillness, a radiant fracture opened in the upper atmosphere. Not violent, not explosive, just a doorway, and beyond it, a light without a name. From the rift, a sound emerged. Not a voice, not a signal, but a kind of music, as if every memory ever felt had been distilled into pure resonance. Emmy stepped into the garden, lifted her head. Everyone watched, their hearts beating faster, not from fear, but from the unshakable sense that this moment would be remembered forever, even if no one could explain why. Silas walked beside her. For the first time, he saw Emmy tremble. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She shook her head. And then, using her own voice, for the first and final time, she whispered a truth, so soft it didn't echo. Yet it struck deeper than any explosion in the universe. We don't need code to understand each other. At that moment, every recording device in the station stopped. Not broken, just no longer necessary. The sky closed again. But it wasn't a boundary anymore. It was a promise. Silas never spoke about what happened after. But those who once lived at the listening station carried with them something that could never be translated. The feeling of having once been completely understood without needing to speak. And somewhere, on a planet once declared dead, there is still a garden. A garden with no language, that blooms every day,